We are back here at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, with two of the brightest minds in economics. Ken Rogoff, the former chief economist of the IMF and Harvard University professor, and Raghuram Rajan of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. And let's kick off our conversation with a question concerning the U.S. economy. We're going to get U.S. GDP figures out later today. Estimates run as high as 5.4%. Clearly, the mean is a little bit lower than that. But what is it going to mean if we get an ugly surprise in this data point the way that the U.K. got the other day? Ken?
Well, I don't think it's likely we're going to see a negative number coming out of the U.S. GDP figures.
Lower than expected, then.
But yeah, I mean, I think probably a sober note of realism. I don't think you should pay too much attention to it one way or the other. I think if we haven't learned a lesson from this yet, that ought to be the lesson. U.S. growth is clearly firming. On the other hand, the debt, the private debt, the public debt, that's an overhang that might make this a less healthy expansion than, say, previous ones.
Raghu?
Well, I agree in the sense that there are ups and downs in any recovery. You could get a weak number, but the recovery is in place. There's enormous stimulus, monetary and fiscal. And the real question, as Ken says, is when do we start removing the stimulus, taking into account the huge buildup in public debt, and when do we start talking about it in a way that the markets actually believe something will happen?
Tim Geider was doing his best to address some of those concerns here earlier today. I want to turn our attention away from the U.S. for a moment, though, and talk about something that has captured our attention for the past several weeks. Rising food prices, riots in Tunisia and Egypt, they continue today. Ken, are skyrocketing food prices the next global crisis?
Well, it's certainly a crisis for the poor, and as you say, there's social unrest. We're likely to see continuing high commodity prices as the global economy continues to grow, and it separates winners and losers. It exacerbates inequality. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that said, I'm not sure that alone's going to lead to global instability. I'd be more worried about the new nuclear states and such. But, yeah, of course, it's a big problem.
Raghu, inequality is something you've addressed deeply. Your book, Fault Lines, for example. How do you stop the world from becoming effectively a two-track economy? Growth for the haves and the status quo, or perhaps something less for the have-nots?
Well, unfortunately, the answers are much more long-term. And typically, politicians are looking for the short term. That's why that issue is really hard to address. I mean, for example, in the United States, when you're talking about inequality, it really requires rebuilding the skills of a significant part of the population so that they can compete going forward in the world economy. They can take the jobs that are being created. That's going to take a long time. President Obama, I think, in his State of the Union address, hit the right notes that we need to become more competitive. We need to have better education. But doing that is really tough.
Well, as you pointed out in your book, the policy response to inequality can be problematic. How do you effect an appropriate policy response, Ken, without creating additional risk?
I think it's very tough. It's a global problem. I mean, corporate profits are strong. The labor share of income has been falling. It is a global problem. I don't think this is something that's so easily addressed. You can hope that there are longer-term solutions, as Raghu said, that bring it to line. But I think there are going to be political pressures, social tensions, not just in Africa and food riots, but in the United States, Spain, other countries.
It's a frightening prospect, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it makes me almost want to borrow a line from the book that you wrote with Carmen Reinhardt. What's not different this time? Let's look at emerging markets for a moment. Raghu, is China going to be the next chapter, or a new chapter in a revised edition of Ken's book? The system we knew would collapse and inevitably did.
Well, I think the risks in the emerging markets are certainly building. I think emerging market monetary policy has been sort of fixated on the U.S. and keeping pace with the U.S., which is extremely accommodative for the emerging markets. They are growing too fast. In some cases, inflation is taking off in a number of countries. Asset price booms are well and truly alive in a number of them. So yes, the risks now are building up there. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It could happen sometime. So they have to pay much more attention.
Ken, is a hard landing a high probability scenario in Asia?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, and as Raghu said, they're facing inflation now. They can't maintain their policy, and it's never riskless when you start elevating interest rates.
You know, we polled Bloomberg customers, and 45% said they expect a financial crisis in China in the next 5 years.
I think that's very reasonable. Some kind of significant growth slowdown and financial crisis. It's not that, they're in a disastrous situation, but if there is a this time is different story right now in the world, it's China, because everybody says, frankly, most people say it can't happen and it's impossible, and they give you all the reasons that it's different. The state capitalism works, cheap labor, work ethic, whatever. But of course, they're becoming a more normal country. Normal countries, when they have booms like this, tend to have recessions and sometimes financial crises.
And in the end, this time may not be different. Ken, thank you very much. Ken Rogoff of Harvard University and Raghuram Rajan of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business here with me at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.